It's got the things in there that need to be in there to make a successful NEIPA. You've got your protein from your flaked wheat, you've got your fat from your flaked oats, and you've got your fermentability from your pils. And that's really all you need for a successful NEIPA.
So in our last video, Ben gave his advice on the two things he reckons you really need in your New England IPAs. Now, that video, it was just a bit of an overview, if you like, of those two elements, being fat and protein. If you haven't watched it, by the way, there's a link just up there to it. So what we have for you today is this follow-up where Ben goes into a lot more detail on that particular NEIPA recipe, which is actually the one he brews with at home. He lists each of the grains he uses, but more importantly, he actually talks about why he chose each one, which I think is going to be really helpful. So yeah, let's go check it out.
And that's really all you need for a successful NEIPA. I have kind of stepped a little bit outside of that. I have followed the same basic premise that I just outlined, in that you need a fat content, you need some protein, you need those things, but I've thought, well, how can I achieve those outcomes whilst also chasing some different flavors and some different kind of characters? So that's kind of where my sort of homebrew NEIPA recipe comes from. So I've got 4.2 kilos of Joe White Pils. I use Joe White Pils because it's cheap and it's good, and it gives me the sugar and the fermentability and all the things that I want from the base malt. It doesn't have to be a fancy base malt. I don't have to use a European Pils malt, and honestly, I think it would possibly be a bad choice for this type of beer because European Pilsner malt has a very distinct flavour, which I don't know will necessarily work in this context. It might do. Like I said, no right or wrong way. If that's what you want in your beer, chuck it in there and see what happens. And if you like it, then awesome. If you don't, then change it for the next time. I know a lot of people make NEIPAs with Marisota as the base malt. Which is quite good. A lot of people like to play around with some American malts. There's some really nice like Gladfield malts which work really well.
Yeah, the American Gladfield American Ale is a favourite malt in
the
general.
Breeze Churro is really popular in a lot of recipes.
I guess being a style that originated in the States, if you wanted to be, you know, really true to it, you could use American style malts, but not necessary as you
absolutely not. So oats. I've got two different types of oats in this. And it was actually Joel who suggested to me when I was first crafting my initial pilot batch of this that I should chuck in some golden naked oats.
Golden naked oats, just because they're awesome, really.
They're so good. I think most of us who work here, when we're doing like weighing out grains and doing the crushes and stuff in the morning, the golden naked oats are probably the preferred snack. Like if you're sort of measuring out some grains and you want to sort of just grab a little handful and nibble on them in the morning, when someone's doing a golden naked oats beer, you definitely sneak a few into your mouth.
Tasty little suckers.
And they have a really nutty character to them.
And weirdly, I've seen this descriptor before, berry.
Or boysenberry.
Boysenberry is probably a better one. It's a hard one to describe.
Which sounds bizarre when we're talking about oats. But I actually find that oats generally will introduce a fruitiness to a beer when you put them in. And that's something that you can really play with, and I have sort of played with a little bit. I saw somebody do 100% oat beer at one stage. It was really interesting. They said it was like so fruity and intense, like with those flavors. So there's obviously something about the makeup of the kind of components of an oat that when fermented kind of produce these things. And that also plays into why I don't use Marisota in mine, because I'm getting that nuttiness and that sort of biscuitiness from the golden naked oats. So I think if I use the Marisota and the golden naked oats, that would almost become too much. Sort of like if you ever kind of overdo the sesame oil in a recipe, like a stir fry or something, and it's all you can taste. I'm kind of mindful of going too far with the nuttiness in a beer that should be all about the hops. So, so that's another good reason to use a good neutral base malt.
Yeah, with a lot in cooking, you could think of an analogy is too much spice will become overpowering. You don't if you can taste any one thing. Well, it depends what you're making. I'm generalising, but if you can taste too much pepper or salt, you've added too much. It should all play smoothly, particularly in this style, except for the hops, which we haven't got to, but that's a story altogether.
No room for subtlety with hops in this sort of beer. And then I've also got malted oats. So it's a little bit of a kind of step outside of the norm for the NEIPAs. People tend to go with the flaked oats. And there's a good reason for that, like they're really easy to work with. They add protein as well as fat. They kind of, it's an easy option to go with the flaked oats. The reason I've gone with the malted oats is largely because at that point I hadn't used malted oats before, and I thought this was a good excuse to kind of play with them. But I feel like they give a different character to flaked oats in the beer. Like there's like an almost perfumey quality to them. And I've started experimenting with them in a few other beers as well. And I get that same kind of character in all the beers that I use them in. It's really hard to describe, but it really is almost like perfumey, sort of very floral kind of character from the beers that I've put them in. Almost like a rose, kind of scent. And I just think that works really, really well in the context of like all these big fruity, floral, hoppy flavors, to have that kind of subtle, fruity maltiness in the background.
Anything you can do to sort of...
It's all those ways, and the berry from the golden naked oats, like all those things are just kind of reinforcing that fruitiness in different layers, in different ways. And it kind of gives it a bigger impact in the end beer. So yeah, that's basically it. And I've got Carapils in there just for a bit of extra body. I could probably do without that, honestly. But yeah, put it in there. Sure,
you got enough.
I've got plenty going on there to
why not
fill out the mouthfeel. But it's it's in there, and some acidulated malt. That's my pH adjustment. I like to use acidulated malt for my pH, or for my initial pH, sort of dialing in.
So do you find that being a light beer with a very light base malt, lots of oats, lots of basically colourless adjuncts in there, that you require a significant pH adjustment?
I chuck in about 100 grams of acidulated.
Okay.
So it's, it's not insignificant amount.
Yeah.
I honestly recommend every beer you do to, it doesn't, like if you've got access to a water quality report for the water you're using, it doesn't take that long to plug it into a calculator and sort of get an idea of what you're going to come out as. I think one of the biggest things, particularly with hoppy beers, especially since the trend really moved away from the into the really pale and light malt character in the hoppy beers. It's so easy to stuff up your mash pH and end up with really soapy, kind of astringent hoppy beers, which I think we've all had plenty of. So with any beer you're doing, taking that little bit of time at the start, if you're up to it, just to kind of plug it into a calculator, see what it predicts you're going to get, and see if you can make any adjustments to the grist. To like adding some acidulated malt in there is a really easy way to adjust your pH without sort of like going down like the acid and the syringes and all that sort of thing. It's one of those discoveries that when I started doing that with my beers, that was like a big improvement across the board of what I was producing. Similar to like kind of when you get temperature control and you see that massive improvement across the board of every beer you're doing. You're getting consistency, you're getting the right flavors. I found that monitoring pH and actively kind of controlling it was another big one for me in terms of just getting the beer I wanted to get out the other end. And it's a pretty simple thing to do.
Yep.
It's not that. a lot of people try to make it sound a lot more complicated than it is because it makes them feel smarter about them knowing about it. It's a bit of a flex, sort of drop a bunch of chemistry terms, and
it can be intimidating for a new brewer. Just the term water chemistry, put the fear into me
and when
for a long time.
When you're doing your first 4 or 5 brews, and there's so much going on that you're trying to keep track of.
You just want to nail down.
You just want to be able to get the basic mechanics of what you're doing sort of under control. But when you do kind of have those mechanics a little bit more on lock, paying attention to things like that are really going to help.
And like say, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So that's really.
So where were we? I think that's pretty
you've
much
gone through the
I went through the
malt,
grist, and then obviously the flour. So I'm about to do something a bit weird. This is plain flour. Note that I say plain flour and not self-raising flour. This is a very important distinction. So self-raising flour has actually got baking powder or baking soda. I never know the difference between the two of them. It's got sodium bicarbonate mixed into it. Sodium bicarbonate is an alkaline salt, and it will mess with the pH of your mash. So if you put self-raising flour in there, you're going to have all sorts of pH issues with your mash. So make sure you are using plain flour when you do this. And you can use flaked wheat, and it will do it'll function pretty much the same thing. But I thought we're doing a stream, bit of theatre, chuck a bit of flour in there. Yeah, it's not that theatrical, but it's a little bit different.
I do remember a while back I was paying out once on people who added flour to their mash in NEIPAs. And Ben turned around and said, "Oh, I do it." To quickly backpedal. "Oh no, I mean, it's fine. It's
It's literally a thing of like I heard people were doing it. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I want to give that a try, and then did it, and it worked.
And it worked. And
I've done it again.
Absolutely would.
But you do kind of. I don't know whether I should sift it in there. Maybe I should have sifted it in there. I don't really know. I'll break it up a little bit.
Make a roux.
Yeah. You wanna fry your flour in some fat for making the best NEIPA gravies. I'm just mixing it in. So flour is basically just milled wheat, right? But like really finely milled wheat that hasn't been malted at all. So what we're really sort of chasing out of that is all the protein, all that delicious gluten. So this is definitely not a gluten-free recipe. If you're
for all the celiacs out there, we do apologise sincerely.
Gluten is massively our friend in NEIPAs. So the flour, you could just use flaked wheat and it would do basically the same thing in this recipe. I just liked the idea of putting flour in the beer, so I did it. And I brought it in today just as like, I don't think it's as dramatic on camera as it is in person, and I don't even think it's that dramatic, but it's just like, what? You're putting flour in the beer? But yeah, it's literally just milled wheat. So milled unmalted wheat.
So it's a way of adding haze.
Yeah,
basically.
well, it's just
the
protein.
idea, protein.
Like heaps of protein. And sugar as well, because the enzymes in the grains will convert the starch in the flour into sugar. So I am getting fermentables out of it. It's not not a totally kind of just pointless endeavour.
Yeah.
And I've only put in like I said, like one or 200 grams in like a sort of 5 or 6 kilo grist. So there's plenty of enzymes from the 4.5, 5 kilos of base malt I put in there to convert it all. I mean, when you think about wheat beers, right, you're talking half and half unmalted wheat with Pilsner, and it still manages to kind of be a fermentable beer. So yeah, you can get away with it.
Yep.